So that's kind of sort of like what I want to talk to you about today, because I've discovered as I've spent time in this agile journey and the transformation journey that there are a lot of learnings that have come out of my world record that apply to us as agile organizations and us as individuals going into agile transformations. A little bit more about me, because I really struggle with a role. Am I an agile coach? Am I a world record holder? Am I a facilitator? I'm a whole lot of things. And that's just sort of some of the aspects of myself. I do a lot of facilitation. But my real passion is in this transformation and this cultural transformation and how we get people to show up in their greatness at their best. So before I launch into what a world record is about, I just want to check that we're all on the same page, right? Because we sort of have a sort of understanding of what is scuba diving. Who doesn't do scuba diving in the audience? Ah, excellent. So then I pitched it exactly right. Let's give you some context. So at the bottom is sort of like what most people think scuba diving is about, waltzing around on a reef, chilling out, watching fish, and some of the terms that I probably will use and think that you all know about. The DV, that's the thing that goes in your mouth and gives you your air. Then we have the cylinder, that's the thing that carries the air that you breathe. And then the BC, that's the thing that allows you to float. And those sort of like the basic terminology when I'm talking about diving, so that you guys are a bit more familiar with it. To give you an idea of how deep is deep, in the early 90s, the deepest dive that anybody had been to was 200 meters, and the guy who went to that depth came out paralyzed. So it was a huge sort of limit at 200 meters for people. Most people didn't get over 100 meters. It was exceptional to get over 100 meters. That's sort of the history of the male world records. As you can see, in the last couple of years, we've had the record shift from 308 meters to 321, and then recently, that's to 2013, it shifted to, yeah, it's my tag, anyway. I'm going to have to undo it. Let's try it, I'm going to put it a bit further up there. Is that better? Okay. That's better for me. I noticed it was going a bit blank here. So that's sort of that's the world record dives for the guys. So let's do the sort of the female journey along the way. As you can see, when I first decided to do the world record, it was like a really easy dive. I just had to get to 125 meters, and my deepest dive was 75 meters. That's not a long way to go. And then a lady called Anne Kristovich went to 167 meters, and it all of a sudden became something entirely different. When I made my first world record attempt in 2001, I missed the actual Guinness World Record by 2 months. An Italian lady went to 211 meters and beat me. And as you can see from that, my 221 meters has held since 2004. On October the 25th, it'll be 14 years. So there is something in there around what is stopping the woman from getting deeper. When I started in 2001, I was 5th deepest in the world. I'm now around 50th deepest in the world. So the guys are all in the 220 to 260 meter range. There are about another 40 of them who've got there. 300 is the range to beat. So this is the world I dive in. My world record is a cave diving record as well as an altitude record. Guinness only accepts the sort of the actual depth. So those are sort of unofficial records in the space. And cave diving is a very, very different ball game to normal open sea diving. A lot of the learnings that I got came from just trying to understand how to take scuba diving and put it into a cave situation, put it sub 200 meters, and actually come out alive. Because this is the tricky part. When you are actually breathing air, you can only get to about 40 meters before the air that you breathe becomes actually toxic towards you and dangerous. The nitrogen in there is a bit like having a couple of tequilas, and you end up not being able to function properly. And the last place you don't want to be able to function properly is underwater at 200 meters. When you get past 80 meters, the actual oxygen that you're breathing becomes toxic, and that actually kills you, which is why the records for deep oxygen dives are highly frowned upon. I think one guy's got 120 meters, and he can't remember anything from 70 meters because he was so like zonked out of his head. which is why we don't breathe normal air, we breathe trimix. And trimix is when we put helium into the gas so that we can reduce the amount of nitrogen and reduce the amount of oxygen in the gases that we breathe. The problem with this is that when we go down, our bodies start to act like sponges, and you start to absorb this nitrogen and absorb the helium. And then when you come back up again, all the stuff that you've absorbed needs to get out of your system so that you can go back to equilibrium. And that's what we do on our decompression stops. We have to find spaces to stop as we go up on the dive so that we can safely release those gases so it doesn't bubble. If it bubbles on a 200-meter dive, you tend to bubble between 150 and 80 meters, and those bubbles are lethal. You die. So it's really one of the key aspects around how you manage the learning around a deep dive is how to actually manage the physiology. So it's not even just about the technical skills. There's this whole vague world about the physiology where we actually need to find a way to go forward. So I want to just play a video. This is a friend of mine. I'm actually behind there. That's what it looks like when you're doing a 100-meter dive. Twin sets at the back and your stage cylinders on the side. That is the entrance to the sort of the preparation space that we go into. We have to get through that to get to the depth at one of our dive sites. It makes it a little bit more challenging because you have to unclip things and put it through. And that's one of the reasons why this becomes a very interesting exercise in learning. Which brings me to sort of, I think, the question that really intrigued me is, and I think that that takes us into the agile communities, is how do you face the unknown? What is it about taking that step out of that sort of safe space and that known space? How do you get into a space where you literally don't know what is going to happen? You can plan for it, you can prepare for it, but you really don't know what is going to happen at the end of the day. And this sort of is, for me, around a couple of stories. It's a couple of stories. The first story is around a funeral, and last time I did this talk, I realized I say the word die a lot. Just because in deep diving, die a lot is kind of like the theme, and it's one of the things that you have to manage. But what really got me going and shifting out of this comfort zone was the funeral of a friend called Dennis. He was on the coelacanth expedition back in the 2000, 2001, when they had just discovered the coelacanth and they were putting the divers into Swana Bay. And he ended up dying on the dive. And I dived with Dennis a couple of times, and I went to his funeral, and it was packed. There was like not even standing room in this church. And the pastor turned around and he said something along the lines of, Dennis never regretted what he did. He enjoyed his life, and he did what he wanted to do, and he died without regrets. And that really, really landed for me because I'd spent about 2 or 3 years trying to get deeper and being blocked all the time by the community. I couldn't find my way out. I had this idea in my head that Nuno Gomez, you saw his name earlier, he's held the cave diving record for a good 10 years, and he held the actual depth record, he's held it twice. He was my sort of mentor. I did a lot of my deep diving with him. I learned how to dive with him. And it seemed to be obvious that after I'd been a support diver for him, he would then take me to 200 meters and I would get my world record. And he would have none of it. I was very annoyed with him at the time because the only other option was to do it on my own, and that was like the risky way. If he went with me, if something went wrong, I would have somebody to help me out at 200 meters. And I'd been stuck in this space where I just couldn't find the courage to take a step forward and actually get into this zone of being on my own and doing something brand spanking new. And at Dennis's funeral, just the words of those pastors just sat with me. And it was the end of 2000, the millennium, the world was going to end. It was like this perfect time to come up with New Year's resolutions. And I realized that I was boring myself with talking about this and not doing it, and that I needed to do something fundamentally different to be able to get myself into a space where in the next coming year, I would do whatever it took to get deeper. But the fear is a big thing, and it's very, very real. So what I did is I gave myself 3 New Year's resolutions. The third one was to do whatever it took, and that was the big one that scared me. The other 2 were like kind of practice fear things. I would just like practice a little here, get a little bit more practice here. And then when I got the practice of feeling afraid, then I would launch into this big thing. And interesting enough for me, the definition of success for this wasn't actually going a meter deeper. The definition was success. Wow. Yeah, let's not even go there. Let's move on swiftly. Who knew you could get yourself into so much trouble with a simple word like success? Anyway, the definition of success for me was to get to the end of the year and know inside my heart that I had not given up, that I had not given in to the fear, that I'd done what it actually took. And the really scary part of this was I knew exactly what it took. I'd known all the time. And what it took was for me to do it entirely on my own and to break all the rules that exist inside scuba diving at the time. Which kind of brings me to sort of the next topic around how important commitment is and how without that commitment, it's really impossible to take that step out of the known and into the unknown. And we use the word commitment so much in the agile communities and in our businesses, but I don't think we fundamentally understand what that word commitment means. That word commitment means doing whatever it takes. If what it takes is getting into your car to drive 100 kilometers to Kimberley to fetch the huge big cylinders of gas which haven't been delivered and without which you can't do your dive, you get in your car and you drive to Kimberley and you go and fetch them and you do 5 trips to Kimberley because you can't put all of them in the back of one bucky. That's what it takes to get something done. So just to speak to the slides, that's sort of me. That is not sort of me, that is me. And that's me on the way down. That's the number of cylinders that I took to do the dive. When you go down, it takes 12 minutes to get to 221 meters. It takes 5.5 hours to come back up again. If you look at those cylinders, the back cylinders are 15-liter cylinders. I was trying to work out how I could give you guys a context about diving and diving deep. A 15-liter, a single one of those on a normal reef dive is about a good 2-hour dive, a good 4-hour dive for me, one of those. So I can do 2 2-hour dives with one of those. Those 2 cylinders were there to last me 15 minutes. And at the end of 15 minutes, they would basically be what divers define as flat. So they'll have 50 bar left in them in 15 minutes. That is the impact that depth has on the basic survival mechanism, which is breathing, which is why we have all the cylinders on the outside, so that you actually have an ability to be able to actually have backup gas. Because as long as you're breathing, you're okay. And it sounds like a really basic statement, but I have a story towards the end of the talk where I actually talk about this. As long as you've got a breath of air, you have choices and decisions. If you run out of gas underwater, you literally have no decisions. I'm 12 minutes away from the surface at the bottom. There's no bouncing up to the surface like some people often do. This is one of my favorite sort of learnings that has come out of my deep diving, and this thing is about what is autonomy and how does autonomy work. We use it so much in the agile spaces, and the one thing that diving deep really taught me was about what autonomy is. And autonomy is that very, very scary place when there's absolutely no one to blame. And I'm a solo diver. I don't like diving with people anymore, but in order to become a solo diver, I had to break the fundamental rule number 1 of diving, and that is buddy diving. And it was this so ingrained in my head about not breaking the rules, fit in, do what you're told to do, that making that step to dive alone, it took me about 2 months to make the step. I did a dive that I've got like 30 or 40 of, and I didn't make more than 4 minutes into the dive. That's the intensity of the fear of being underwater in a cave by yourself. If something goes wrong, if I've made a wrong decision, I can't blame anybody else. If I did listen to somebody else's advice, I'm just stupid because they're not doing the dive. They're not going to experience the consequences of their advice. I'm the person that experiences the consequences of the dive. And this thing about autonomy has become sort of my big thing. At the bottom of 221 meters, I got that experience of living an autonomous life. And it's the most incredible experience. It's one that I have chased for the last 14 years. That, by the way, is the entrance to Bushmannsgat. Bushmannsgat is the place where I did my world record dive. It's a sinkhole. That gap over there, we're at about 20 meters here. That little gap over there fits a single diver. And you have to scrape a little bit to get through. So it's about 20 meters. As you can see also, there's a line. Because we're diving in cave diving, you need a line to be able to connect you to the surface. Bushmannsgat is the 3rd largest water-filled cave. it is pitch, pitch black. The black is like velvety, perfectly clear visibility, but completely black. And this was 14 years ago, and the torches that we had then are nothing like the torches we have right now. So, and I suspect even if we took some of those torches down right now, you would not be able to see the walls. You're literally hanging like a spider from the top of the roof. This sign is the sign at Verna, which is one of our inland sinkholes. It's at 50 meters, it's the police sign, and it pretty much sort of sums up cave diving. Of course, we ignore it and carry on doing our cave diving. And sort of the thing that I'd like to sort of like wrap up the stories that I've been telling around is how difficult firsts are. So often when I tell the story about cave diving, people go, well, I'm never going to get into the water. I'm not that crazy to be able to do something that dangerous. The thing is that it doesn't matter what your first is. If it's your first stand-up, your first ceremony, your first sprint, your first tango, your first marathon, firsts are incredibly hard. They take you out of your comfort zone. And I really struggled with this idea of firsts. I grew up in a culture and a society that told me to wait for permission, that told me to listen to my elders, listen to the experts. I was never given any sort of confidence or authority in myself, and I literally did not believe that I knew. Let me rephrase it another way. I did not think that I in any way could anyhow know better than my elders, better than my betters. So I was stuck in this like sort of mindset trap. The one thing that I have particularly come out of this is that at no time in this 3-year journey was I not petrified. In actual fact, in the year of 2001, I was so petrified that I couldn't sleep for 6 months. And I had this weird thing in my head that real explorers are never scared. This is easy for them to do. And I realized, firstly, that I wasn't born as an explorer. Circumstances kind of forced me into learning how to do it. And the second thing, that courage isn't a feeling. And I can't help wondering how, courage is a feeling, not an action. And I can't, now I've got myself stuck again. Courage is a feeling, not an action. And I'd spent a lot of my time waiting to feel courageous. And it was just because I had this deep commitment to actually make this happen that I just literally closed my eyes and walked straight through the fear. And courage was what I realized I had on the other side of it. And it's interesting for me to watch people who are sitting with a first in front of them. I often want to ask them, so are you waiting to feel courageous? Because if you are, it's a really, really long wait. To give you more of a context on the learning side of this, when you're doing something for the first time, there's no path to follow. So I had 4 guys who'd been deeper than me. I had access to one of them. The other 3 I didn't have access to. And I had no way of really taking how they did it and turning it into a recipe that worked for me. It was one of the first things that I realized is that I'm not Nuno Gomez. He used to spend 4 hours a day in the gym, and he pushes incredible weights. His standard default setup is twin 18s. Those things weigh 25 kilograms each. I can't stand in them. That's how heavy they are. Never mind swim with them. And because he had been so successful, there was this like thing in everybody's thinking that if you don't do it the way Nuno does it, you'll die. So it took me quite a while to realize that I wasn't Nuno, and that I needed to find my own way to do this. And this is kind of where the learning kind of experience comes into it. I had to learn how to learn. I had to learn how to take everything I knew about scuba diving and break it out into little pieces. Like, why do we do buddy diving? We have a buddy so that if anything goes wrong with our gas, we've got a backup supply of gas. But there are a number of ways of solving that problem. The thing was, I'd been so entrenched into one way of doing things, I never really understood the reasons behind why we were doing things. And it took a lot of like asking that annoying question, why, to be able to get to the underlying risks and problems that the scuba diving processes had been designed to actually fix. And then I had to put it all back together again in a way that worked for me. So I can't do big cylinders, but I need to have the same amount of gas to breathe. So the way to do that is to have 2 extra stage cylinders down the side. That in itself is a problem because now there's a good chance I have to switch DVs at 200 meters. For 200 meters, the last thing you want to do is take your breathing supply out your mouth, put it down, search around for something else, pick it up and put it in your mouth. Even when you've practiced it, so that you can do it literally blindfolded and in under 5 seconds, you still don't really want to do it. Because like if I'm breathing, I'm safe. This is not so safe. But these are kind of the skills then that I really had to identify and practice so that when I got to sub 150 meters, 180 meters, I didn't have to think about this stuff. This was automatic. If I wanted a DV, I knew exactly where to go to get it. I wasn't searching or looking for it. It was completely automatic. Because at 221 meters, I have only got maximum a minute to solve a problem. Those 15-meter cylinders that last me for 4 hours, at 221 meters, if I'm lucky, it'll last a minute. So if that thing free flows, I've got a minute to shut it down and save my gas supply. Otherwise, I've got a very, very, very long holding my breath ascent to do to get to my backup gas. So I have no time in my head when I'm at depth to be learning. My learning has to have happened already so that when I'm actually at depth, I'm actually fully focused, fully centered, and paying attention to the signals that I'm getting from around me so that I can respond to any situations. And then I'm really, really praying, and sometimes I think it is literally praying. I'm praying that I have practiced enough, I have been diligent enough, that I have the skills to respond to those problems should they happen. So there's sort of a selection of my DVs. Each cylinder has 2 DVs on them, and I have about 10 or 12 cylinders. Each of those DVs cost between 8,000 and 12,000 rand. One of the other reasons why it was difficult to do this dive is it's super, super expensive. I did my first dive in 2001, completely on my own, completely sponsored by myself. A lot of end-of-month salty cracks in that and visits to my mom because she had food and I didn't. And the surprising thing was I set up the space to go do this dive. It was just 246 meters. And in setting up the space, I was so petrified of this dive. We went, it was pouring with rain, we were camping, it was freezing cold. I had 1 support diver, not 8. I didn't have this many DVs. I'd borrowed every piece of equipment I could, and I still did not have enough equipment to be able to do the dive safely. I was in a flooded asbestos mine. That's that little door that you saw, which meant I had to swim at depth in order to be able to get my depth. So I was swimming at 110 meters. The guys do bounce dives. They go down as fast as they can. They take literally 1 breath at the depth, and they come back up as fast as they can. I was going to be spending about 6 minutes, sub 100 meters, and you don't know what your decompression is going to do. You don't know how your body is going to absorb that. I did the dive, and I had to break that dive down into literally hours. I got to the point where I realized that if I didn't set up the dive, because you can't just go in, I've got to put cylinders in different places. I've also got to do some acclimatization dives to get my body ready, flush out any bubbles I might have. I arrived on a Sunday. I was planning on diving on the Saturday. I realized about Wednesday that I was just like faffing around, wasting my time, and that I needed to commit to this. And what I was going to do was I was going to set it up so that if I woke up on Saturday and I felt like doing the dive, I could do it. Because the last thing that would be like, imagine waking up on Saturday and you haven't bothered to do the setup of the dive, and then you can't dive. Woke up on Saturday and the sun was shining. Had an extra 2 people arrived, so I was kind of screwed. I kind of had to get in the water now because there's like people who expected me to go into the water. I broke that dive down into almost minutes. First I went here, then I did this, which I know how to do. There's a 7-minute swim. Then I went through the blast door. Then I went down the central shaft. Then I did the 3-minute swim. Then I went into the hole, and then I was at 146. But if I'd actually sat on the surface and tried to think about doing this dive on my own, I would have got completely freaked out by the size of it. I was literally going in at 18 meters, down 100 meters, swimming at 3 meters, into a tiny little incline shaft that is probably as wide as this and as high as I am. It goes down like this. I had no deep support divers, so if something went wrong, it would be a body recovery if I couldn't get myself back out again. And the funniest thing about this, or not the funniest thing, the weirdest, strangest, actually I don't know, I have a word for it. I wrote about this when I came back, and when I wrote about having done this, in the space of 2 weeks, I had a full corporate sponsor. Scuba Pro was sponsoring all my gear, and I had Afrox sponsoring all my gas. It was as if, until I was committed to doing this, Nobody else was going to actually believe that I had any skin in the game. I wanted it given to me. And they weren't exactly wrong. I didn't want to have to face the risk on my own. So yeah. So these are kind of some of the strategies then that I've been talking about around learning that I've learned from my deep diving. And that is like to do everything one thing at a time. When I'm breaking skills out to learn, I don't go to 100 meters to learn how to take a DV out my mouth. I do that at 20 meters, and then I do it at 50 meters, and then I do it at 80 meters, and then I do it at 100 meters. And then I put it all together. So I've broken each of my skills out into something that's really self-contained, and I can practice it, and then I can integrate it back into the way I'm diving. The other thing about, I've mentioned avoiding learning under pressure. The other thing, and I found it quite interesting, it came out twice yesterday, is knowing your exit strategies. So in diving, there are 3 ways that you know that you pull out on a dive. When I've reached my target depth, just when I get there at 221 meters, you don't decide to go to 225. You go to your target depth. When I reach my time, because my time is, all my gas usage is based on my time. If I stay longer, I don't have enough gas to get out. And the third one is, it's a bit like your petrol tank. When I reach a certain limit on my cylinders, I have to turn around, because if I breathe into that reserve, that is the gas that will get me out to my next cylinder. So you can't just breathe the cylinder flat, because how are you going to turn around and come back out again? So everything that you do when you're designing this is not only about getting to your target depth, it's also about what's really about getting out and telling the tale afterwards. I think if I look at that, I think I've covered pretty much everything. Designing a new way, breaking apart the old way to see the reasons why. That's been a big thing of mine, and it's possibly why I really enjoy Agile, because a lot of it's around concepts and the transformational changes that we do. There's a lot around understanding why we used to do something there. What is the relevant portion in there? Can we retain what works and let go of everything else? So let's move on to this one, which is a really new learning for me around you can't follow. It fascinates me that I've been the deepest woman in the world for 14 years. I literally don't understand it. The world has changed so much since I did it in the early 2000s and the late 90s. When I did it, I was the only woman diver doing this with a whole lot of guys. There was a lot of ego, a lot of male personalities in play. It's not like that anymore. There are a lot of female technical divers. Well, a lot, maybe pushing it a little. It's not uncommon to find a female technical diver, whereas in the 2000s it really was uncommon. And I've been always wondering about this, because 2 ladies have attempted this, and they both died. So 2 ladies got to 232 meters, and neither of them came back out of the water. And I'm fascinated by it, because I have this mixed personality thing with my dive. It was incredibly difficult, but in a way it was really quite simple, because all I had to do was work out how to do it and then find the courage to do it. And I realized when I looked at these 2 ladies and I looked at their dives, and I haven't done an in-depth research, but they had an expert with them. And that expert had a reputation for being able to dive sub 250 meters, not necessarily a good reputation in the diving community. And I couldn't help asking myself whether or not the mistake that those ladies made was to follow the expert and not make the dive their own. I'm eternally grateful for Nuno for not actually taking me to 220 meters. Everything I know about learning, everything I know about stepping into the discomfort zone, into a new way of doing things, comes from the fact that I had to do it and experience it myself. And it feels so easy to just have an expert tell you how they see it. The thing that I'd really fundamentally learned was that I'm not Nuno, and I see this in the agile spaces all the time. Spotify's done it, Google's done it. We have all these examples of companies that have done it. We should be able to just apply this, put it on top of it, and then we'll be able to do it. But even at a team level, teams are fundamentally different to each other. The composition is different, the appetite for risk is different, yet we have this thing that we can get an expert in, and I know I might be shooting myself in the foot as an agile coach and consultant, but let's move on. And then we'll just directly do what the expert does or says, and it'll all be good. But nobody knows your space better than you. Nobody knew me better than me. And I realized very quickly that Nuno had designed his dive for his strengths. His strengths were my weaknesses. and I had to find out what my strengths were and design a dive that would actually fit to my strengths. And the thing at the time was, it was so fundamentally different to the perceived and acknowledged correct way of doing it that I got so much backlash. I was actually thrown out of the technical diving community for 2 years until I did my first deep dive, and everybody thought, oh, hang on a minute, maybe she isn't that, maybe she can do it. Because to be quite honest, I'm not too sure who didn't believe I couldn't do it more, me or them. And the more they told me I couldn't do it, the more I was going, oh, hell no, I can do this. So I actually have to say thank you very much for them to telling me I couldn't do it, because it pissed me off enough to actually get off my ass and do it myself. So what is kind of the moral of the story coming out of this? I was trying to think of a way that I could just describe it, and I think it's kind of this. You take one expert, maybe not so much a pinch of salt, a lot of salt, and what you want to do to it is that. You want to mix according to taste. So you really want to use the expert as a perspective, of a way of actually seeing the world in a different way, and being able to translate that back into your space and your uniqueness. And I hope the next lady that tries this does this. She breaks my world record, and she does it on her own, following her own instinct and practices for herself, and doesn't listen to the expert who tells her exactly how she should do it. So let's actually move into what it looks like. This is Bushman's hut. So the environment matters. That on the side there is the water, the little green bit. And this is where we dive. That's what it looks like from the top. Where we dive is on the top, is in the back there. That's where the hole is. I've got a last aerial view. That's what it looks like from the top. The hole is there on the bottom right. That flat portion there, we have to walk across. All our gear's got to go in. All our gear's got to come out again. We carry it in every day because we're open circuit divers. You're carrying in 6 cylinders every day, and you're walking 6 cylinders back out of there. It's a 200-meter walk. It takes about 45 minutes, and we've got 80 meters to descend into. That's just an example of the gear. It takes us a full day to get the gear in and a full day to get the gear out. And that's how we do it. All manual labor, no ropes. So I was a lot fitter back then, a lot. Oh, and we were on a farm, so we did cheat and pay the farm workers. But we did take some of the stuff down on our own. And it wasn't all farm workers. The world record dive itself is very interesting because literally I took a bit longer this time around when I did 221, but you literally have from a Saturday to do it in. So that's like 5 days. In those 5 days, you've got to get a team of 8 people to be able to coordinate, get all the stuff in. 12 cylinders have to go in, their cylinders have to go in, they've got to get their acclimatization dives, I've got to get my acclimatization dives. We can't miss a single thing. And along the way, everybody gets a very, very bad food poisoning. So there's a day where everybody is down. So we have to allow for that as well. And there's a rest day. So I think you guys on sprints don't really understand what a sprint is. This is a sprint. 10 days to get 8 people to one dive, and we literally have one chance. If I blow it on that dive, I've blown 200,000 Rand, and I'm coming back in 6 months' time. I can't come back in a week's time. My body needs a chance to recover. And that's the idea that you get of where you're going, you're just hanging like a spider from the top. And another nice picture, those are the oxygen DVs. So I spend 3 hours on oxygen at 4 meters. I can put my hand up basically and almost touch the surface because that's how long it takes to get rid of the gases that you've absorbed. You know how long it took me to pick this up? I only realized this when I was going through my slides about a year ago, is that we did daily stand-ups. We did them every evening around the braai. It's a dry zone, by the way. There's no diving and drinking. And every day we would talk about, did we accomplish the tasks we set out the day before? What impact that would have, how we were going to recover the next day, how much time we had lost, and we'd replan the day before. We actually did it, and I think this is hilarious, we actually did it visually. That whiteboard was set up every night, and then the next morning it would be taken down, and we would write up the whole dive. That is my dive. If you can see, I'd go down to 320 minutes. It's actually slightly longer than that. You can see exactly who needs to be where at what time. It's run with military precision. And we make all of those times. People are there when they're expected to be there. That's kind of the commitment that the support divers bring to the space, is if something goes wrong, I'm relying on somebody to be in a very specific place to help me out. There's very little they can do to help me out, but I still want them there. And it also gives you sort of a level of reassurance that you're not going to be on your own. The first picture is me getting ready for my dive. The second picture is me after 6 hours. I wanted chocolate. Nobody had chocolate. I was really disappointed. It was 40 degrees at the bottom of that hole. My body temperature came out at 34 or 33 degrees. The paramedics wouldn't allow me to walk back out again until I got my body temperature up, and I was fine. I just wanted out of there, and I wanted to have a cold shower. You can't have a hot shower because one of the things that we don't talk about when we're talking about 6 hours in the water is what do you do when you need to go to the loo? Well, guys have condom catheters, and they just merrily go to the loo, and it just all comes out into the water around them. I do not have the anatomy for that, so I have incontinent nappies. They last 5 minutes, and then when I come out, I term it previously used organic water. Up to here, I'm sopping wet, literally. So when I come out, all I want to do is somebody just dump water over me so that I can not feel icky and smelly. And that's the team. I want to talk about one dive. That's the team and most of our equipment, by the way. That's just my equipment. Everybody else had about 4 to 6 cylinders on their own. I want to talk about one dive to sort of like wrap this up, which is one of the dives that I've struggled to really put into context. One of the things that I did, I think I did particularly well, was that I always left only one thing uncertain. So if I wanted to change something, I only changed one thing on a dive. And I practiced this by saying I wanted to be able to prove that I could spend 6 hours worth of decompression. So get that decompression load. I wanted to know I could do that before I did the depth. And the way I did it was back in Bushman's hut, which is that view there. I mean, back at Buttplas, which is that view there. Because of the swims, if I did 160 meters here, it was equivalent for me doing 221 meters, which meant the only thing that I did not know, I hadn't tested when I did 221 meters, was the depth itself. And this dive managed to hold me back for 3 years. I just could not do it. There is something about going into a hole that's about this high by yourself, knowing that if anything happens in that hole, you're not coming back out again, that I just could not get my mind past. And at about 140 meters, it gets narrower, so it goes to there, to here, to here. You just actually see this thing go like this, and your eyes just get bigger, and you're going, why am I doing this again? Is it really worth it? And I didn't know that it wasn't really a good-looking certificate, so I didn't really even have that to pull me along. I did this dive. Finally, I did my whole commitment thing. Just do it. If I don't do the dive, I can't, and then let it go. No regrets. And I got stuck. So I got to 146 meters, and I was petrified. I'd stopped this dive 4 times just from being petrified. And I just looked, and I go, no, I've got enough time. I've got enough gas. I haven't reached my depth. There's absolutely no reason but fear to turn around. We're not doing that. We are going forward. And then as I accelerated, I was at 152 meters, and I wanted to get to 160. I just came to a dead halt. The last thing you want to do in these dives is come to a dead halt. There's silt like this, so when you stop, you're just in a silt out. You can see about this far in front of you. You can't really see anything. And I remember I was 7 minutes late when I came back out again. I had 50 bar in every single cylinder I had, and I still had to do 15 minutes in order to get to my next staged gas. And I remember I must have spent a good 3 to 4 minutes just trying to unsnag my fin. Because this happens every now and then. You're following a line, the line gets on your fin, and you snag it. And then it suddenly occurred to me, maybe I'm not going to get out of this. You know, this is one of those dives, so it's like 50-50. Do I live or don't I live? And then it occurred to me that I'm wasting my time. Somebody is going to come and do my body recovery, and my hand is going to be on my fin, and they're going to go, well, why didn't you do something different? That wasn't working. But it took me 4 minutes to get to this realization. And then I realized I was like breathing like a steam engine, which is not a good thing at that depth because I'm using up gas. And then I realized that I'm actually not paying attention to the problem. I'm trying to solve the problem of overstaying. Will I have enough gas? Will my decompression? Will I bend? Those are problems like over there. What I need to do is get moving, and then I work on the problem that's killing me now. Don't work on the problems that are going to kill me. Solve this one. So it took 2 minutes, and there is no such thing as 2 minutes at 152 meters. 2 minutes to get my breathing back right, which is about 4 breaths a minute. Get my breathing back right and really strategize. What am I going to do? I'd stopped looking at my gauges because what's the point? I mean, knowing how little time or little gas I've got left was completely irrelevant. I was going to sort this until I took the last breath, and then after that I'd make another plan. And then I made the decision. I had 2 options. I could cut the line, but that could tangle in me again, and I did not have time to waste untangling, or I could leave my fin behind. So I left my fin behind, which was kind of sucky because I had a 3-minute swim to do with one fin loaded down with gear, and I had no idea how I was going to do that, and not breathing because I had no gas. So I did that, and I turned around, and I let go of the line to turn around, and I go, oh, cuck. Did I turn around? No idea where up or down is, no idea where the line is. I'm completely disoriented. Turned around, and I'd planned for this. I'd said to myself, in this situation, what would happen if I did this? I planned for it. Inflate your BC, hit your head on the roof, and just keep on doing that until you get into clear water. The universe was still testing me because as I got into clear water, one of those side slung cylinders got caught in the line. So that's easier, just unclip it. I ended up dropping that because there's only so much your brain can actually function on. I came out 7 minutes late. My support diver was like this, and I still had 15 minutes to do. And obviously, I'm here today, so I managed the dive. I didn't bend, and everything was fine. But it really taught me something about how easy it is to get trapped into doing the first solution, and how we don't notice when things change. And we don't really learn. It's like learning is a skill that we don't really apply. I actually had to force myself to think that this has changed. Everything I'd planned for was no longer there. How was I going to manage the situation now? I needed to learn then and there in that moment, and I didn't really have any options for getting it wrong. It was very much a 50-50 situation of whether I would come out of it. A bit of a strange story to end on, because it's not necessarily the most upbeat story. But for me, it really wraps up the importance of learning and how little we seem to value it in our modern companies. We see learning as an event. We don't see learning as a day-to-day thing. Everything about diving has taught me that you try something, see what happens, adjust, practice it, try again until you get the right results. Then you've got a standard practice that you can then use and incorporate, but I'm always checking to see if the standard practice is still valid. When the standard practice isn't valid, I then go back to the drawing board. Most of the time I don't have 3 minutes to do it in, I've got longer time, so you really want to be able to get that a little bit tighter. You don't want to have to work this out in 3 minutes. So where does this leave us? Firstly, adapt or die. I'd like to put the word learning in it so that we can get ourselves more attuned to the word learning. The second thing is this. Without learning, we are stuck repeating an endless loop of the same day. So yes, you're number 1 now, and you've been number 1 from the last 10 years, but it doesn't mean if you carry on doing what you're doing now, you'll be number 1 in the future. And if we don't pay attention to learning and understanding that learning is important, we could get stuck in this endless loop of doing the same thing over and over again, like I was doing, trying to just unhook my fin. You do, you learn, and you do again. That's how it works. And then you repeat it until you get success. Wait. And then you start again for the next thing. Because every time you get that step forward, new possibilities become open to you that were never possible before. I did not start doing this to become the world record holder. I hated deep diving when I started. And this is kind of my sort of final thoughts on it. I wasn't born to be the deepest. I had to learn how to do it, which for me is kind of exciting news, because that means every single person here has something inside of themselves that they can learn how to unleash and how to bring out. And that's the question I'd like to leave you with, is what learning are you avoiding? Because I can't speak to cultures, because cultures are like this ambiguous thing. I can only speak to you. You are the cultures in your organizations. Thank you very, very much.